gamers all around the flat universe. Today we're doing a different kind of tier list, but it's not a tier list. I'm just using this because it's going to be easier for me to make this for you guys. So what is this going to be? We are going to be making a list of civs, in my opinion, that should be nerfed, buffed, or unchanged. And we're gonna go per age, all right? Obviously, we're gonna skip Dark Age because you know, I can't really buff or nerf Dark Age too much. I think all the civs are more than fine there. So first, we're gonna start with Feudal. So I'm gonna talk about which civs I would buff. Like I said, I think they're in a good spot, or which civs deserve a nerf in Feudal. Because I think just saying like, oh, we should nerf or buff that civ is a little bit, you know, it's too simplified, and it depends at what stage in the game. Now, I'm not going to talk about, maybe like, I'm not going to give out suggestions what should be nerfed. Maybe I'll throw one out there, but nothing into great detail. So Feudal, let's start with French. I think French is in a pretty good spot in Feudal. I don't think it requires a buff or a nerf. Now, one thing you will notice, I think it's a lot better to nerf, or sorry, it's a lot better to buff things than to nerf things. Because when you nerf, you're taking something away from a civ, from the game. But when you buff something, you're adding to the game. So I won't be, you know, putting too many nerfs out there unless it's something completely OP as hell. I think French is in a pretty good spot. It's a very, very strong civ in Feudal, so I don't think it needs any changing. I don't think it needs buffs. I don't think it needs nerfs. The next civ we'll talk about is going to be Rus. Now, I do think that Rus is probably too strong in Feudal, and it's probably one of the very few civs that I think it requires a tiny nerf. I think it's still the best civ, and it comes from Kremlin mostly. I think it needs like a tiny little nerf to kind of go in line with some of the other civs. Mongol, I actually think it's in a good spot. I've been playing a lot more trade recently. I don't think it's weak. I think you can fight with Feudal, with Mongols in Feudal, so thumbs up. Ottoman. Sorry, I'm updating. Ottoman, I think, is a very good spot in Feudal as well. I don't think it needs a nerf necessarily. I do think it's very strong, but it is linear, so that's kind of the disadvantage of the strong build. Next one we'll talk about is Malian. Again, I think it's in a good spot. You can go to TC with Malian. You can rush Castle. You can fight in Feudal if you go Cattle. Don't think it's a big of an issue. Delhi, again, pretty good spot. You have Ghazi Raiders, yada yada. I do think that HRE should get slight buff. Now, I don't know what I would buff for HRE in Feudal, but I've talked about this many times before. HRE in Prolonged Feudal is just really bad, and you gotta get out of Feudal as fast as you can. I've played this civ a lot. It's one of my most played civs, and I don't really know how you win in Feudal, in Extended Feudal. Like, you gotta move away from it, or you're gonna be stuck there forever, and you're gonna be beaten there. I don't think H3 needs a massive buff. It's kind of like Rus. I don't think it needs a massive buff, but it needs something. But I don't know what that something is. Because Prelates and Aachen Chapel are really good, but I feel like it's more military. It's not so much economy, it's military. Because every other civ has like knights or attack speed on units or extra health on units, and H3 has nothing, right? They just have good eco, but you know, there comes a point where you got 50 units, where you have 55, it doesn't really matter. The next civ, China. I think China is really, really good in Feudal. Wouldn't change much. Abbasid, same thing. I think Abbasid military wing is really, really strong. And yeah, got no complaints. I don't think it's OP. I don't think it's like underpowered or anything like that. And the last one is English, which I'm also going to put in a good spot. Although English is at high levels pretty hard to pull off in like Prolonged Feudal, because you're basically all infantry, but you know, I think English is in a good spot. So Feudal wise, I think game in general is mostly fine. I don't think it needs some massive changes in order for, you know, some of the civs to become stronger or weaker. I think a lot of the problems in the current balance comes after that, right? So yeah, that was feudal. Let's do castle. In Castle Age, now this is where I feel like some of the civs that are considered weaker, the problems start to arise, where it's like they're fine in feudal, but the longer you go, the worse the game is. So you kind of, if you don't end the game becomes pretty complicated for you. I'm gonna start with Malian. I think Malian in Castle is actually a really good spot, and it's probably their best age, to be honest. If you're doing the cattle build, that's where your strengths come in, and you know, they come online and everything is great. I think HRE, again, I think is in a fine spot. You know, there's a lot of like micromanagement you gotta do. You gotta take the relics, you gotta harass, you don't have a lot of units, but you have stronger units than your opponent, so it kind of opens up HRE a little bit more. Delhi in Castle, again, I think it's more than fine. You know, you have the keeps that are nerfed, but you can boom quite hard with Delhi in Castle. You can take a lot of the relics usually, so I think Delhi is still fine. We got Ottoman, again, I think it's in a good spot. Wouldn't change much. China, I would probably nerf it. Like, this is where the problems start to arise for China, and at this point against China, the game might already be over. So there's a lot of reasons for it, and I don't think everything from China needs to be nerfed, but I think something needs to be nerfed. I don't know what that is. Like, if China enters Castle with like really good eco, actually no, I'm gonna put it here. I think China, you can still fight it in Castle. I think you can still fight it in Castle. Problems arrive later. Now, a civ that needs a buff, and I've been saying this for fudge knows how long, is English. Now, the problem with English is this. It's fine in feudal, it needs a buff in Castle, then it's broken in Imperial. And I don't really know how to... I feel like maybe like a landmark, one of the landmarks is getting buffed in Castle, because man-at-arms in Castle are really strong, but the build-up for English as you age up to Castle is really slow. Like, your upgrades for man-at-arms arrive slow, and then you're still infantry-based. The economy feels kind of weird. Like, a lot of the other civs just kind of pop off with the economy, with units, with everything, and English is still kind of slow. Kind of chugging along, and I always felt like they needed a buff, and I still feel that way. Again, I'm not sure what exactly I would buff, but it's like the moment you hit Castle with English, you gotta stay back, you know, and I don't think that's a good way to go about it. Rus, I think Rus is, I think it's good in Castle, but not, you know, not broken at that point. I think most of the power from Rus comes from feudal snowballing later on, and yeah, I don't think it's like too strong or anything. Now, the civ that also needs a buff, in my opinion, in Castle is Mongols. So recently, Mongols obviously got, you know, Keshiks changed, I guess. They were Lancers, now they're Keshiks. And I would like to see, personally, Keshiks get a little bit more HP at least. Like, I'm not talking, I don't know what Keshik HP is in Castle. Someone in the chat might know. I think it's like 170. I think even if they get like a 10 health buff or something, it would be great. Because the way you play Mongol, 175. Yeah, so the way that you play Mongol right now is usually trade with Keshiks and archers into, you know, Castle. The problem is you get to Castle, and again, this is where other civs get access to Lancers, they get access to stronger Knights, they get access to stronger eco. And while you are trading and your eco is great, your units are just weak. And you don't really get a power spike, you know? So I think Keshiks don't need to be same as Knights as Lancers, but just a tiny little buff to their health, I think would help a lot to, you know, transition onwards. And then we have French, which again, I think is in the good spot. And the civ that I actually think is way too strong or not way too strong, but too strong and possibly requires a nerf, would be Abbasid. I've been playing a lot of Abbasid recently, and if Abbasid gets out of Feudal, I think it's one of the civs that the win rate just goes like this after. Like, if you get out of Feudal into Castle and you have decent economy, their eco is just insane. Like, I think the problem comes in, like, once they transition to farms, I think the game feels like it's almost over. Because the amount of units they can pump out is fucking batshit insane. And also, if you go eco wing, your farms are cheaper. If you're trading, you know, if you're trading, the game is over already. Now, I don't think Abbasid requires a massive nerf. I think in general their economy is too strong and it scales insanely well, because they got, like, on top of the normal farming upgrades, they got the passive gathering speed for all their villagers, which also influences farms. And they also got another upgrade in House of Wisdom for 15% extra on farms. And I think that's probably a little bit too much. So I think they need a slight nerf to eco, but nothing major. Nothing major. Alright, and then the last one we're gonna do is Imperial. And now I think, honestly, this is the biggest balance problems in the whole game. So most of these you've probably been like, oh, so everything is in a good spot. Well, this is where the problem lies in. So why are some civs weaker than others in AOE4? Well, I'll start with Delhi. The reason why Delhi is, in my opinion, not one of the, like, top 5 civs, let's say, is not because their units suck in Feudal or Castle. They're great. You can play Delhi in Feudal and Castle great. The problem is Delhi 2TC is non-existent, for example, because I've always said this. If you decide to go 2TC, you are extending the game, right? You are, if I go 2TC and China goes 2TC and the game goes to Imperial, Delhi's probably dead, right? So this is why Delhi players opt for, like, super committed all-ins or sacred side victories, because the options in Imperial are very bad. And I feel like most of the problems in the game right now come from that point of view of, like, well, I gotta finish the game or I'm dead. The opponent knows that, so they just play safe and you kind of basically are the aggressor and they just defend and win. I think that, like I said, we used to have a period where the biggest issues were in Feudal, where, like, some of the all-ins are too strong. Then we had an issue in Castle where some of the Castle rushes were too strong. And I think we haven't really kind of dealt with Imperial problems in quite a while in the game. So I think Delhi Imperial landmarks are also really bad. Delhi actually in super late Imperial I think is really good. It's one of the best civs, because the elephants are incredibly strong, but you need, like, full trade and you need all upgrades to complete and you need, like, 50 farms. But by the time you get that, that's like an hour into the game. So I think Delhi needs Imperial buffs. I've talked about this before, but adding Culverin to Delhi and adding, like, at least, like, cut 10%, 15% on the upgrades in Imperial would help the civ immensely. Immensely. Like, that's all the buffs I think Delhi need to become way better in Imperial. The next civ is Abbasid. Abbasid, in my opinion, Imperial deserves massive nerfs. It's absolutely insane. The trade for Abbasid in Imperial, it gives you a second resource. Like, you don't need to say anything else. Every civ gets gold. Abbasid gets, well, Mongol I guess too, but Abbasid gets insane amounts of secondary resource. So on maps where maybe you run out of wood, Abbasid can trade wood, basically. You get wood. Camel archers are incredibly strong. Their infantry got extra health. They have camels which reduce the damage of the cavalry. You have camels that give your units armor. I just think there's, and again, the gathering speeds on farms and everything, it's way too strong. In my opinion, Delhi not Delhi, Abbasid is probably a top 2, 3, 4 late game civ. It is insanely powerful. Not to mention, you get, from Golden Age, you produce units faster as well. So there's that too, on remaxes. Yeah, it definitely needs a nerf. Another civ that needs a buff is Malians. Malians is in a it's not in a similar boat. Delhi Malian suffers from their eco is great, but your units are trash. It kind of feels like you're just throwing units at the opponent instead of like having some kind of meaningful pushes, like you're trying to create chaos. Maybe that's okay, but I do know that Malian does not do well in Imperial as is at all. Like most civs dented pretty hard in Imperial. I personally don't even know what I would buff for the civ, so it's hard for me to say, but I do think they need a buff. The next civ that needs a nerf in Imperial is HRE. I mean, I love my HRE, but it's fucking strong. Man-at-Arms with HRE late game, you pretty much have gold to perma-spam Man-at-Arms. You can spam Man-at-Arms Horseman forever, and once HRE has like 60 farms, it is very hard to kill them. Not to push and kill them, like you can kill their units, but the economy is so strong that the units just non-stop are arriving. And it doesn't matter how well you're trading, it's extremely hard to kill HRE in the super late game. Also their towers and keeps have so much health, which is also a little bit problematic. The next civ we'll talk about is Ottoman. Again, straight up, I mean, if you played Ottoman, you know that it fucking sucks. It's probably the worst civ. It's actually, in my opinion, worse civ than Malians and Delhi in the late game. It's just bad. The fact that they don't have hand cannoneers, they have janissaries, but if the opponent opts to not go for cavalry, you just don't have hand cannoneer, which is like the main damage unit in the game. You don't have it. And great bombards are not that great. They get absolutely demolished by springhulls, they get absolutely demolished by culverins, and they're just too expensive and too slow to be worth it, in my opinion. No, I don't think Ottoman is as good as Delhi. I think Delhi is way better in the super late game. Delhi in the, like, once you have trade and everything, Delhi has 20% attack speed on hand cannoneers, on men-at-arms, on spearmen, archers, crossbow. They have elephants, which I don't know if you've ever had an army of like 100 army supply of elephants, but they fucking kill everything. Like they mow down everything. They're very expensive and it's hard to get to that point, but if you do, you're in a very good spot. Civ that needs a nerf, again, another obvious one is English. I mean, enclosures are still too good in my opinion, and English farms are a little too good in my opinion. And I would probably, I think the main issue with English in the super late game is still farms. I think it just gives way too much gold. And the problem is, you don't need to trade with English. So the fact that you don't need to trade and your opponent has to have 40-50 traders, you have more army. And that would be okay if your army sucked. But not only you don't need traders, your army is also insanely strong, because you have the men-at-arms with bonus armor, you have longbows, you have hand cannoneers with attack speed because of network of citadels. So not only you have more army, but it's also stronger army. So yeah, eco too strong. Next civ, again, another no-brainer, is China. Do I even, like, where do I begin? Taxes are broken. It's basically like enclosures, if not better, how much gold they give. Grenadiers are broken. The siege is like the strongest in the game. Fire lancers, palace guards, like anything. Everything that China does is too fucking strong. Their farms, insane late game, which don't necessarily need a nerf, but Chinese units are just fucking crazy. The next one we'll be talking about is French. I think French is in a good spot, to be honest. I always used to put French as the worst civ in Imperial before Ottoman and Malian arrived, but I think now French is actually pretty good in Imperial because of the Red Palace. Your keeps and TCs do so much damage, it's almost like you're immune to enemy raids. Your units get discount on their cost. And I actually think it's a pretty good save in Imperial. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it needs buffs. No, I think it's pretty good. The next one is Mongol. Now this is an interesting one, and I honestly don't know where I would put it. Definitely not in a nerf category. I honestly don't know where I would put Mongol. I feel like early Imperial for Mongol is awful. It feels bad, it's hard to control the map, but once you've secured a map, it is incredibly strong. I'd probably put it in buff, but it's more like change it a bit. And the reason for that is because it's kind of similar to Delhi, where it's like early Imperial, it sucks, but it's not that long as Delhi, right? It just sucks for the first like maybe 5 to 8 minutes in Imperial while you get your upgrades. And if you have a trade going, which you usually should with Mongol, you actually kind of have like budget fire lancers with that upgrade from Ubu. Your hand cannoneers move faster in the influence of towers. You have Keshiks with all the upgrades, which are then not that bad. Mangudai in Imperial, not that bad. You get stone forever, so you can make bombard towers forever. Recently we've had what's it called? Recently we've had an upgrade, Court Architects added to Mongol, which increases the tower HP by 30% in Imperial, which is nice. I just think they need a small buff, and maybe the Keshik buff I mentioned in Castle, maybe that would be enough. Like if Keshik has got 10 extra HP in Castle and then got like another 10 extra for a total of 20 in Imperial, maybe that would be enough. But as of right now, they do feel a bit weak, but once the game progresses, they, in my opinion, they feel pretty good in like super late Imperial. And the last one I'll talk about is probably going to be, or the last, I mean, not probably, it's going to be Rus. I don't know, honestly. I don't think Rus is that strong in Imperial, so I'm gonna just put it in a good spot. I think the one thing that makes Rus like too strong is the Rams, but I feel like that's more of a problem with Rams, not with Rus. You know, like, because they have an extra upgrade if you go for the landmark. And their Rams are really strong. They're cheaper. You also get extra wood. So, like, your Rams cost 200 if you place it near the landmark. You also get 20% extra wood, and you get an extra upgrade for Rams. But again, I don't think that's a problem with Rus. I think that's a problem with Rams specifically. Like, the whole Springle thing, having more range, is not really a thing anymore. Like, yeah, people use Springles, but not too much. Streltsy are really good, but I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, Streltsy are unbeatable. Like all these, like maybe HRE struggles against Streltsy because HRE runs a full melee comp, but Abbasid, like Camel Archers completely fucking dent in Streltsy. English Longbows completely dent in Streltsy. Anything from China dents in Streltsy. So Streltsy I think are very good, but they're not as good as they used to be because obviously their ability got changed. So I think it's a strong civ, it's a solid civ, but I'm not like, oh, Rus is Imperial, I guess I guess I can tap out kind of thing. I think with Rus in the late game, a lot of it depends, where you're at in the game, how many relics you got and all that. And I feel like it's very similar to French in that way. And also if you go for stronger civs, for stronger siege with Rus, then you don't have stone walls, right? Because you don't have that landmark. So it's kind of like a trade-off. If you go for the stone walls, then your siege is just as any other in the game, and then you don't really have much going for you. So yeah, that's it. As you can see, I think most of the nerfs and buffs are required in Imperial, and I think that's where a lot of the current balance problems, in my opinion, come from. Like I said, I would love to play Delhi 2TC, but considering that Imp is so bad, it's very demotivating to even attempt to go for Imperial Delhi because of that. You just want to completely avoid it. It's also why a lot of civs all into China, because it's like, well, if I get against China in Imperial, I'm dead, right? So we would see a lot of meta changes to civs if Imperial was buff/nerfed for a lot of these civs, because people wouldn't feel as pressured, like, oh shit, I gotta end the game. Because what's the first thing you think about when you play against Abbasid? Or China going 2TC? You don't think like, ooh, I'll just go 2TC with Malian as well and it's gonna be great. No. You're like, I'm gonna fucking die. I gotta kill them immediately. So you just all in them. And I think I've talked about this before as well, but in strategy games, whenever you're forced to do a strategy, I think that's not a good design. So that's it. That's my list for buffing and nerfing civs in AOE4, what they require. You know, I had some suggestions for them. For some of them I didn't, but let me know what you guys think. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're watching on YouTube, as always, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you all. Check me out on Twitch or probably live right now. Twitch gamers, let's keep going.